Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for your audio main event. Weighing in on all things pro wrestling, your hosts, Sheldon Goldberg and Mike Johnson. And now, PWInsider.com presents PWInsider Radio.
Welcome, everyone, to an Independence Week edition of PWInsider Radio. Sheldon Goldberg here along with Mike Johnson. Mike, happy 4th of July in advance.
Yes, happy Independence Day to you, and for those of you who are listening outside of the United States, just bear with us for 1 week.
Right.
We Americans kind of get very prideful about our independence day, as should everyone. Let's
give a late Happy Canada Day shout-out to all of our friends north of the border.
Yes, thank you all, eh?
This week, right? So, anyway, yeah. So, a lot of big things going on this week. Of course, given that it's Independence Week, Independence Day coming up, maybe a good place to start is maybe looking back a little bit. You know, pro wrestling, Mike, has always had a fascination with characters who wrap themselves in the flag. Whether it was a military character like a Sergeant Slaughter, although Sergeant Slaughter originally started as a heel. And that's kind of an interesting story, too. But everything from the Patriot to, I mean, there's dozens throughout the years.
Hey, Hulk Hogan.
Right.
Still American, all the way down to, like, Ranger Ross. There,
absolutely.
You know, it was always going to... It's not a character that you see as much today. There might be the fact that they've served in the military as part of their personality, but the idea of, you know, someone waving the stars and stripes and that being basically the entire definition of who they are, like a Corporal Kirshner back in the day.
Right.
You don't really see that as much, but, you know, it was kind of like the cornerstones of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, especially in the 70s and 80s.
Well, you know, it's very interesting that you bring that up because it's funny. Like in the 60s and 70s, particularly in the 70s, military characters tended to be looked upon as heels. And the reason for that was because of the Vietnam War and all the protests. The military were considered to be heels at that point. So, therefore, when you had Sergeant Slaughter coming out as a heel, that was sort of a reflection of the times at that point. And in the 80s, when the Reagan era took over, all of a sudden people started wrapping themselves in the flag, and it was one of those things that was instantly over.
Well, a lot of that had to do with the conflict in the Middle East and also the Cold War with Russia. So it became us against them. And all of a sudden, you know, we were the good guys and they were the big bad threat that we didn't know what was going on over there behind the Iron Curtain, except we knew they were up to no good. And that allowed, you know, characters like Slaughter to become a babyface, and also Hacksaw Duggan and, you know, with the 2x4 defending the United States against Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov, which when you think about it, Hacksaw was really infringing on the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov's freedom of speech, wasn't he? He wouldn't let Nikolai sing the Russian national anthem.
Exactly.
So when you think about it, you know, in really logical terms, Duggan was the heel there, but he was defending us, so it was okay. And, you know, how many anti-American characters did Hulk Hogan face over the years, you know?
Sure, absolutely.
But that was also a mark of the times where the characters were very one-dimensional and simplistic in the way they were designed. Mr. Fuji was the sneaky Japanese guy and things like that. But yeah, you know, it's always interesting because the idea of the Superman babyface being wrapped in the flag, you know, that's kind of as a mom and pop and apple pie as pro wrestling is.
Sure.
You know, even like back in the day, you know, with Superman. Superman was always the guy fighting for the cause of truth and justice. You know, now they present him as always this alien fish out of water, but he was always, you know, this guy from another planet who believed in the morals of America. So, you know, when you look at the, you know, just at the history of our country, the way the characters were shaped is a reflection of that time period.
And exactly. I think the greatest example of that, and one of the greatest babyface turns of all time, would be when Sergeant Slaughter turned babyface. Do you remember that moment? Iron Sheik was in the ring. This was just after this is just during the period of the Iranian hostage crisis. So Sheik is in the ring. He just has a match. He's coming out. Slaughter is coming out for his match. They meet in the middle of the aisle. And they've got a little confrontation there, and then Slaughter talks about the Iranian hostage crisis, and I'm an American, and he waves the flag, and blah, blah, blah. And he was just instantly turned right there, instantly became a huge babyface hero. And
right, he did the Pledge of Allegiance, right?
He did the Pledge of Allegiance. That's right.
I bet you that would never fly on television today.
Exactly. I remember watching that on their syndicated TV show back in the day, and it was over as over ever gets. Again, a reflection of the times.
Well, look at Slaughter's heel turn in 1991. You know, they played off the Persian Gulf War, which when you look back at it, that's, you know, it's kind of a sleazy move. But I understood, like, what they were trying to do, which was, you know, let's have the All-American Hulk Hogan destroy the Iraqi sympathizer. So, absolutely. I mean, it didn't draw the way that they kind of expected it would, but you could see, like, why they were putting those chess pieces in place and what the idea was.
Right. But Patriotism, a timeless theme in pro wrestling. You think about all the people that have wrapped themselves in the American flag and gotten over. Kurt Angle would be another example.
Well, in a lot of people's minds, he was a real American hero because he won the Olympics in '96.
Absolutely, and legitimately so. Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about people wrapping themselves in the flag. Of course, the Patriot was a short-lived gimmick that didn't get over to the extent that I think that they had hoped, and I think that had to do with the fact that the character was masked.
I also think, because at that point, the masked character had kind of been very passé. It was before luchadors had kind of become in vogue and guys like Rey Mysterio had become super hot again. I also think, you know, part of it was that, if you remember in the beginning, one of his first big appearances was a Raw in Canada. Yeah. And he got, like, booed out of the building because Bret Hart was doing the anti-American deal.
Right.
And pro-Canadian. And, you know, and that was not a place where the Patriot was going to be a popular man.
Very true. Very true.
But even, it's interesting. Even, you talk about that Hart Foundation deal with the Hart's anti-American and pro-Canada. You know, there's just something about pro wrestling that allows it to tap into the consciousness of the general populace that cares about it, that they can use what makes you prideful as a way to manipulate you to cheer or boo. And, that's, pro wrestling in its purest form has always been about, playing the crowd like a violin and making that crowd react the way that you want. And we don't see that as much anymore because the workers have evolved into sports entertainers. But when you come across somebody that can do it right, it's always a thing of beauty to watch.
Exactly. And it always gets over without fail.
I agree. Unless you're a real American, probably not going to get over this week.
Exactly.
What do you think of the Zeb Coulter character as the crusty old Fox News style guy complaining about America?
I don't know. I love Dutch Mantel. Don't get me wrong. I think Dutch Mantel is one of the greatest minds in wrestling, one of the greatest people in wrestling. I'm not so sure about that character, but God bless him. I'm glad he has a job. I know if anybody could make the most of that particular character in that particular scenario, it would be Dutch. Zeb Coulter, for those of you who want to stick with the work names. But I don't know about that. I think it's almost too much. It's some angles like that are reaching, and I think that's one of them.
I think he's great in his portrayal of the role.
Right.
But there are times I'm like, how is any of this going to draw money?
Exactly.
And if it's like what Jim Cornette said once about when Vince Russo would book the miscarriage angles. He's like, it's not going to draw money. It's just going to make people feel bad about watching TV, or it's going to remind them about something terrible that happened in their or someone else's life. Mm-hmm. And, I kind of feel that way about the Zeb Coulter character, where I enjoy his delivery, but at the same time, I don't see how being reminded of all these problems in the world and issues with the government allegedly spying or whatever, making me want to be entertained while I'm trying to escape real life and watch pro wrestling.
People watch pro wrestling to get away from all those problems and to get away from all those issues and see something that is black and white more or less and has some sort of a, good triumphing over evil or evil thwarting the good guy who eventually gets his comeuppance or whatever, that's what pro wrestling is. It's not to remind you of all the ills of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
we got a couple of sad stories to talk about, obviously. Okay. You actually just saw him before he passed away. Matt Bourne, who was Maniac Matt Bourne, Big Josh, Doink the Clown, the original Doink the Clown, and the best version of that character, in my opinion, passed away this past week. He was found unresponsive by his girlfriend in, I believe, Plano, Texas, and rushed to the hospital, and they were unable to save his life. Toxicology still pending from his autopsy as we record this. I'm not going to go out on a limb here and say definitively what happened, but I would assume it was not naturally caused. Well, and, it's a real shame. But you actually just got to see him literally days before he passed away.
Yeah, sort of semi-amusing story. We were at the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame and FanFest last weekend in Fairhaven, Massachusetts. And at the NECW table, guests of ours were John Philip Havage, the director of the Barbed Wire City documentary, and the Blue Meanie. And Meanie and I were talking. We were looking over at him. He was there with Marty Jannetty at a table. And Meanie says to me, that's not Matt Bourne. Nah, it's got to be a fake Doink. It's got to be somebody who's got the suit or whatever. I said, no, I think that's him. I think that's Matt Bourne. He goes, nah, can't be. So neither of us went over there because we couldn't decide if it really was him or not, but it really was.
Wow.
So, sort of a sad thing, that we didn't get a chance to speak to him. Or
he was so good in the character. He was so good in the character. You didn't realize he was Matt Bourne.
That's right.
He was he was a hell of a worker. I don't think he got his just due in the ring, but he was like one of the last vestiges of those 1980s guys that were developed in the early 80s in the territories that everything that he did felt legitimate. There was no, he didn't really hit him there. He was light. He especially, as Matt Bourne, he worked at like a guy that was a villain who was vicious and did things because he wanted to, not because he needed to.
Right.
Which is there's a difference there. The heel, the chicken shit heel that has to hook the tights because it's the only way he's going to win. He's never going to be seen as a tough guy. But the guy who's got the baby face on the run and decides he's going to grab him and rake his face against the ropes just because it makes him laugh, that's the guy you got to worry about because he's a little touched in the head.
Right.
And, Bourne was always a really... Because I went back and I watched some stuff from Pacific Northwest and some stuff in World Class where he was managed by Percy Pringle and teamed with Buzz Sawyer. Right. And, man, they don't make wrestlers like that anymore.
They do not.
He might not have been like a flashy guy who did big moves off the top rope and did flips, but everything that he did was like watching the alphabet. It went A into B into C into D, and he told a match, and he told a story, and that's not something you see in a lot of the guys today. And, I think a lot of that has to do with the development of guys who go from an indie training ground right into developmental, and then they're taught the WWE way. And while the WWE way may be the predominant style, it's not the only way to learn how to wrestle. And
very true.
I think the guys who are weaned learning different styles like a Daniel Bryan and are able to kind of weave that all together, those are the guys who are going to be more memorable in the ring overall. And Bourne, he never really had the over-the-top personality of, like, let's say, like a Shawn Michaels or a Hulk Hogan. But if you watch his stuff pre-Doink, it's all very intense. It's all very gritty. Right. And it's what wrestling is supposed to be, especially for that time period.
He's really the last vestige of that journeyman territorial worker of the 60s, 70s, and so forth. And, of course, his father was a great journeyman, too, Tough Tony Bourne.
Right. He worked a lot in Texas and obviously the Pacific Northwest, which is where Matt started.
Right. Exactly. Like you say, he wasn't the flashiest guy. Wasn't the guy with the best body, wasn't the guy with the best personality or whatever, but when you saw him in the ring, you were looking at a tough, gritty guy that could get the job done. So
yeah, and the interesting thing is, and I interviewed him, which if anybody wants to check it out, it's up on PWinsider.com or PWinsiderTV.com, and I talked to him about, you were an old school guy. How did you feel when you first heard Doink the Clown? And he talked about he sat there, and it probably was only a couple of seconds, but he sat there and it felt like an eternity to him, because he was like, this has to be a joke. Like, what? And even like asking, well, what did your dad think? And, his father's response was kind of priceless. And it was like, well, all right, well, at least you're going to make some money, and that was the thing. Like, I don't think the Doink the Clown character, in the vein that it was originally designed to be, ever would have worked had it not been for Matt Bourne.
I agree.
Because he took all of the aspects of the maniac Matt Bourne villain, and he pulled them in and used them in the Doink character. So he was basically Matt Bourne, but the idea was he was using the clown stuff as psychological warfare to screw with people. Whether it was another guy coming out from under the ring to confuse people and get the heel win, or it was, doing Doink antics and being silly as a way to lull the late Brian Crush Adams into a moment where he doesn't have his guard up, so he can pull out a fake arm and beat the hell out of him with it. There were some pretty demented things that went on with that original Doink character.
Right.
And, I have to say, if he probably didn't have his personal issues going on at the time, he probably would have been one of the biggest baby faces of the 94-95 era. Now, I know they moved Ray Apollo into that role.
Yep.
And Ray did fine with it, and that was the version of if anybody remembers this, when they did the Survivor Series in 93 or 94, where it was the 4 Doinks against Jerry Lawler's guys, I think it was. And was it? No, it was the Doink. It was that was Doink and the Little Doinks against Lawler and Sleazy, Wheezy, and Queasy. Can't believe I remembered all those names off the top of my head. But they did the deal with the Bushwhackers, and Men on a Mission came out dressed as the Doinks, and those were the 4 Doinks. And then at the end, it was Bam Bam Bigelow who he was feuding with at that point. And the thing at the end was that when Bigelow left, Doink popped up on the screen. That Doink was Ray Apollo. So from that Survivor Series on was the babyface version. And it was okay. I mean, for, what was meant to be basically a mascot for the company. But the 93 to 94 version that was Matt Bourne was pretty damn entertaining. And one thing that I've heard a lot of people say is, when they went back, they didn't appreciate the character, because it was, wrestling's, they always say wrestling isn't a circus, and now they're giving us a clown.
Right.
And the flip side of it is, when a lot of the early Raw stuff started to be released on DVD, and fans who dismissed it are now 10, 12, 15 years older, and they go back and watch it, they go, wow, he really was good. He really was so good in that role. And he had some good matches. I mean, he had a good match with Bret Hart at SummerSlam. He had a couple of good matches with Kurt Hennig on TV during the Intercontinental title tournament. So, he was never a bad worker as Doink.
Right.
It was, the work in the ring was always secondary to the personality, but that was true of 95% of the WWE performers in that era.
Exactly.
Unless you were Bret Hart or Shawn Michaels or a Workhorse or maybe Kurt Hennig, it was always about the personality first. So it's a shame. 55 years, way too young. And I heard from a lot of guys, who worked in the Northeast and, and developed in the Northeast in the last 5-8 years, that were really heartbroken about it, because Bourne had been based out of New Jersey and had been working a lot of independents, but also helping out at different schools and mentoring guys. And a lot of guys were talking, and some guys are, in national companies now, we're talking about how Bourne would give them tips and things like that, and really help them grow as full-fledged workers, not just as, guys who were doing spots. So, and that's a shame, because that's one more key to the past, and one more guy who had the secrets of why things worked, who's no longer with us. And
that's an element of wrestling that is so sorely missed on the independents right now.
Yeah, and I mean, there's, it used to be, and I'm just going to use names here. Let's say the original Sheik. He was around to, when, he was 70, 80 maybe?
Right.
I may be wrong there, so I'm just pointing out numbers. I'm just using numbers out of pulling numbers. He imparted his wisdom on Rob Van Dam and Sabu and who knows how else.
Right.
Someone like Eddie Guerrero or Chris Candido or someone who's gone so early for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
They're not around now in their golden era, their golden age, I should say their elder age, to impart their wisdom onto the next generation. So those stories, those different theories, those ways of training, those road stories are now lost forever. And as each one of those guys passed away early, whether it was Road Warrior Hawk or whether it was Chris Candido or whoever, every time that happened, the chain of pro wrestling got a little bit weaker.
Exactly, because those guys, in many cases, they're either second-generation wrestlers or they had very strong influences from the generation that preceded them. And that's what passing down their knowledge and their influences is all about. And when they disappear, that chain is broken.
Yeah, and it's a real shame.
It is. It is.
One other sad story that we have to talk about this week, and then I guess we'll take our first break. It came out in the New York Times that on June 25th, Richard Heyman, who was the father of Paul Heyman, Paulie Dangerously, the mastermind of ECW and the current WWE performer, passed away, I believe at the age of 83. I was told it was a short illness. It had been a couple of weeks, but they had realized pretty early on that it was probably not going to be a good ending. Going to be a very important footnote in pro wrestling. Because had it not been for the Heyman family, well, obviously there would be no Paul Heyman. That goes without saying.
Right.
But, one, he brought his son to the pro wrestling world at a very early age, originally as a photographer, which is how Heyman got ingratiated with the business, shooting ringside at Madison Square Garden and becoming close with Lou Albano and the Grand Wizard and Freddie Blassie and all these guys. Mm-hmm. And they were his original mentors. But not only that, financially, when you look at the bankruptcy statements for the original ECW, I think they owed a little bit over $8 million to their creditors. Mm-hmm. Half of that, so about $4 million or a little more than that, was all from the Heyman family. So wow. Richard Heyman was, in many ways, the primary backer of the original ECW. And, Paul owned it, no doubt about it, but the money had to come from somewhere, and in many cases, a lot of it came from the Heyman family. So, if you look at what ECW accomplished in terms of changing the way wrestling was presented, the influx of pop music in a lot of ways, the blood and guts and stuff that was taken from Memphis and FMW and Japan, and just the development of talent. Everyone from Chris Jericho to Rey Mysterio to Taz to Tommy Dreamer and so forth, none of that would have existed or existed as long as it had.
Right.
Had it not been for Richard Heyman. So
right. Mm-hmm.
You got to, whether he gave his son the money out of love or he gave his son the money out of, I believe, you can do something and do something great and your riches are at the end of this journey. No matter what his reasoning was, and I'd have to think it was out of love because you want to do the best for your children.
Oh, of course.
And you want to give your children everything that they ever wanted in life.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of people who owe their careers and where they are now to the fact that Richard Heyman was willing to do this. So yep. you have to bow your head and tip your hat to the man.
True, absolutely. And also, it's very sad when someone loses a parent. I don't care who you are, what age, what the circumstances are. That's a very difficult thing to go through. And my condolences to Paul and the whole Heyman family. I know they said that they don't want anybody to mourn, they don't want anybody to be sad, and so forth. But by the same token, whenever you lose a parent, that's a hole in life that never gets filled. So my heart and thoughts are with the Heyman family.
Amen to that.
All right. Well, tell you what, let's take a quick break right here. When we come back, we'll talk about recent doings in TNA and much, much more when PWInsider Radio continues after this.
Just tell them, but I always say that if the crowd is good, then I'll be good. If the crowd sucks and doesn't give me anything to work with, then I'll suck too, and we'll all be miserable.
You mentioned earlier that they kind of tugged on your heartstrings, telling you they wanted to put you and the Midnights and the Rock and Rolls into the Hall of Heroes. Now, for fans who are not from the Charlotte area, explain why that distinction meant so much to you.
Well, once again, it's and everybody asks me, well, what do you think about you and the Midnight Express going in the WWE Hall of Fame? Well, for one thing, it's not going to happen. the Midnight Express never wrestled for the WWE. For another thing, I don't think they can make any money off selling our DVD or get some kind of, that is about who can we market, who's dead, that the Sheik goes in because we're in Detroit, or whatever, a feel-good moment for Vince, or elsewise some way he can make some money off of it. None of us really fit that bill. But with either like the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame up in Amsterdam, or that I was actually voted into last year and couldn't attend because I was at a Ring of Honor event, or something like the Hall of Heroes, this is not necessarily, it's not the Associated Press sports writers voting on it, for heaven's sake, but it's people who don't have any financial interest in selling the DVD just strictly because the Midnight Express and Jim Cornette are going to be there, but who want to recognize that the work we did meant something to them, and they believe that people would like to see us receive that award. And so whether it's, a legitimate, like I said, a legitimate voting like the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, or just an honor being given by the Hall of Heroes, it means more to us because it means that people actually enjoyed what we did, and they feel like, well, they weren't just flunkies. They were guys that deserved to be in something like this, and that people would enjoy seeing them get that honor. And so, that means more to me than if they say, well, we want to give you $5,000 to come up and be in the WWE Hall of Fame. We're going to sell a DVD. Okay, fine, whatever. That's not going to happen. And I always said I wouldn't go in before Bruno. Well, now Bruno's in. So I guess now I have no choice to refuse, but they're not going to ask anyway. So what difference does it make? And I'm not going to lose any sleep over it.
You really think they won't ask you at some point to do the WWE Hall of Fame? You manage the WWF champion at Wrestlemania.
Well, I don't know why they would ask, just because I've been so cranky with them in the past, and there's not a lot of people. Well, there's a few people that used to work there that still work there that I'd like to see again. Most of the people that worked there that I would like to see again don't work there anymore, and I just don't see why it would come up. And like I said, I'm not going to spend my time dwelling on it. But it's, it is what it is.
It's interesting because, the idea of you being inducted in Louisiana, where the Superdome is, and you worked in Mid-South, and you headline there and everything else, kind of, you can see where the puzzle pieces would fit.
Well, but by the same token, then, in that case, I'm not going to go in before Bill Watts.
Bill Watts is already in.
Is Bill Watts in the WWE Hall of Fame?
I think Bill Watts is already in.
Well, son of a bitch, and I guess I got to go. I'll wait for the phone call. But just because, okay, we're in Louisiana, so let's put, Cornette in or whatever. We're in Detroit, let's put the Sheik in or what. I don't know. Maybe I'll have to hold out until they put Savage in.
For the record, Bill Watts went in 2009.
Okay, well, then,
Well, you can hold out. Fez isn't in yet. You can say after Fez.
Yeah, and once again, and how does Jim Cornette go in anything related to wrestling before Lou Fez? There's no rhyme or reason to it. I don't know. I mean, I'm older and happier and less cranky, and if they asked me, maybe I would and maybe I wouldn't, and it would depend on how far it was, whether I had to get on a plane or not, or whatever the fuck. But like I said, I don't know that I would be high on their list, and we'll leave it at that.
Now, I asked you earlier if you'd be interested in being a performer again, or a personality again. Given the stress that goes on anyone who works in a management position in pro wrestling, in 2013, and after your 9-month sabbatical, and probably a longer sabbatical, do you ever see yourself wanting to work as a producer or as a booker or in management of pro wrestling ever again, or do you feel like it's time for me not to do that because just for my own good?
Well, once again, in 5 years, if some fictitious, unheard of company came along, it just was the greatest opportunity, and I loved everything about it, and they were going to give me a tremendous amount of money, and I accepted it. Then somebody would dig this interview up and say, "Look, Cornette's a hypocrite. He said he'd never." The thing is, you don't know what you don't know, but booking, matchmaking, producing, I loved the individual components of it. I love sitting down with Delirious and talking about what kind of matches we could have or what kind of things we could do on TV. I loved going to the television station and doing the post-production and putting the packages together and assisting the editor and saying, well, can you put this in or can you do an effect, and then watching them make the magic appear and fly across the screen. I like rewarding guys who have talent and who work hard and guys that you want to see succeed. I liked training. I like announcing, but for every part of the things that I like doing, there's other things, outside influences, whether it be the people that you have to put up with or the travel that you have to do or whatever that mitigates that somewhat. So the right thing at the right time, and not too much and not too little, and just right, like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, yes, but who knows?
You're listening to PWInsider Radio.
Welcome back to PWInsider Radio. Sheldon Goldberg and Mike Johnson. You just heard a sample of one of the very compelling reasons why you should become a subscriber to PWInsider.com. The PWInsider Elite section loaded, absolutely loaded with great interviews, great content, exclusive content. If you don't get it, it's so cheap, you're missing out. So whatever you do at the end of this, check out PWInsiderElite.com, subscribe. It's well worth it, and you won't miss out on all of the great content that you're going to hear each and every week on that site. So we encourage people to do that, Mike.
Yeah, we've had a lot of really great interviews in the last couple of weeks. Jim Cornette, Johnny Powers, who was a major power broker in the 1970s and early 80s.
Yes.
Wrestling. I mean, the man tried to buy the WWF twice over the years. We've had all sorts of incredible, right now, a brand new interview with Tully Blanchard of the original Four Horsemen is up there. I tend not to announce names in advance because I'm always afraid of cancellations. But if you're like a really old school fan, we've got some really cool interviews with guys from the 70s and 80s coming up in the next couple of weeks, partially because of the Mid-Atlantic Legends FanFest. Which is an amazing weekend that takes place at the beginning in August every year in Charlotte. And they actually announced next year is going to be their final edition. They've done it for 10 years. And they go and they celebrate the legacy of the National Wrestling Alliance and the Crockett promotions and all that. And, they've had so many amazing personalities that have been there. Everyone from Ric Flair and a reunion of the original Horsemen, to Roddy Piper doing a live Piper's Pit stand-up show, to a reunion of the Fargo brothers, Jackie and Don Fargo.
Wow.
To, also, like if you're an old-school wrestling fan who grew up loving the territories or reading about them in the Apter mags and Pro Wrestling Illustrated and all that stuff, it really gives you a chance to kind of step back in time and be like, wow, this is so cool, and I'll never forget, writing about pro wrestling, it's very easy to get jaded about stuff. I'll never forget getting the chance to meet Bob Caudle for the first time and being very touched because, I kind of grew up watching the man.
Sure.
And to me, he was always this grandfatherly, authoritative voice speaking about what was all this chaos that was going on. And so getting the chance to meet him, for me was like, wow, I'm so lucky I got a chance to meet Bob Caudle and kind of talk to him. And, and not just talk to him about wrestling, we're talking about life. And that's the difference between the Mid-Atlantic FanFest and a lot of the other conventions that are out there. And I love, there's other great conventions out there, especially in the Northeast. But with FanFest, because everybody is there from Thursday to Sunday, while they do this, the scheduled autograph sessions and the photos, there's more of a loose feeling to it, more of like a community over those 4 days where, you could be walking through the lobby and here's Ole Anderson just sitting there talking to people. You can sit down and join the conversation and listen to Ole Anderson complain about the world, which is always a beautiful thing. Right. And, or sit at the bar and have a drink with Tully Blanchard. It's like, who didn't ever want to have a drink with one of the Horsemen back in the day?
Without doubt, yeah.
So,
yeah.
It's like, and so, you get to, you kind of get that fantasy fulfillment of, the fan that you were when you were 14, 15, 16 years old.
Especially if you grew up in those parts of the country where those territories operated on a weekly schedule. Like you had, that was a way of life.
Yeah, Monday night you went to the matches.
Every Monday, every Friday night, whatever it happened to be in that particular town or that particular point in the territory, wrestling was something you did every week. and it became a way of life for people. And those people that grew up with that, I'm kind of jealous of, because growing up in the Northeast, where always the World Wrestling Federation, the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, was a monthly territory, and they had bigger buildings and so forth. There was only one spot in the whole territory, by the way, Mike, up here, that was every week. That was north of Attleboro, Massachusetts, Jack Witchy's Sports Arena.
Right.
Only spot in the territory that ran every week.
That was I interviewed George the Animal Steel once, and he told me that was his favorite building to ever work in the old WWF loop.
Yes.
So what was the atmosphere of that building like?
It was a converted roller skating rink, and it was a real old school deal, and it was great. I went a few times, but it was really terrific. Very intimate feel, very much. It was the only place in the whole area that had that old-time territory feel. And I didn't appreciate it until years later, when I was old enough to actually go to different territories and see what went on in different places. But sad to see that place gone. That was really quite an experience to go to Witchy's. That was the closest thing that you could get to going to, like, the Memphis Fairgrounds, the Nashville Fairgrounds, rather, or the Mid-South Coliseum, or any of those little buildings that they ran in other territories every single week.
And, it's always amazing because, like, people always go, oh, well, the ECW arena was a dump. Well, I hate to break it to you folks, but a lot of those buildings back in the day, whether it was the Pavilion in Calgary or the Sportatorium,
oh boy,
or the Armory in Tampa,
yeah,
pro wrestling, just because of what it was, kind of lent itself to being in a dump.
Exactly.
And those smaller buildings, while they were not visually pleasant to the eye, and they were not perhaps state-of-the-art with their facilities, because the sightlines were so good and you were so packed on top of the ring, they added to the aura of the legitimacy of what you were watching. Because if somebody got punched and they reeled back and the spit went flying off of them or the sweat went flying off of them, there were times in those smaller buildings where that stuff would land on you or land at your feet, and you'd be like, oh, that was real.
Yeah.
Especially the main eventers, who always kind of worked a little bit more of a snug style because they had to protect the legitimacy of not only themselves, but the championships and the territory. So it would be, because you all hear the stories of the older fans who go, well, I don't know about all those matches, but that main event with Dusty Rhodes, that was real. Yeah. And that was because the main eventers went out of their way to protect the business a lot more because they were making big money. But yeah, I mean, one of my regrets as a fan is, by the time I discovered pro wrestling, it was 86, and I was like 11 or 12 or whatever it was. So by the time I really understood the history, a lot of those old buildings were gone.
Right.
And they were, even like the Mid-South Coliseum sits there vacant. Nobody can use it because they can't upgrade. They don't have the money to upgrade the facilities to make it accessible to the disabled, which is why when Lawler was going to wrestle Hulk Hogan all those years ago, it ended up happening at the end at the FedEx Forum. Not that Lawler worked the match, but the original plan was to do like one last great Mid-South Coliseum card. And, with the exception of maybe the Nashville Fairgrounds, I can't think of any of those old buildings that are still standing. I mean, some people say the Mid-Hudson Civic Center, which was used for WWF TV for a long time, and that's where they filmed The Land of a Thousand Dances, and I think Roddy Piper had his TV debut there. But then, that was never really considered like a classic pro wrestling building in the vein of like the Sportatorium. So. And it always breaks my heart to see a lot of those buildings torn down because while wrestling is obviously a very unique niche genre, there's a lot of history there. And one thing that, especially in today's digital age, I wish that I want everything from the newspapers to the old newsletters to the fanzines. I want all that stuff to be digitally saved. That way someday somebody can discover it and go through it. Like, I honestly feel like I wish Kappa Publishing would go and take all those old magazines and scan them, even the ads, scan them and save them. And put them out on CD-ROM or DVD-ROM because Marvel Comics and DC Comics do very well putting out complete collections of like all the Spider-Man comics, all, let's say, the Ghost Rider comics or the X-Men comics, and sell it for like $40-$50. And someone who's a collector or someone who would want to read that stuff but probably can't get their hands on it because of the price or the age would have a chance to enjoy it. Now, I think to me, that's something I'd love to see some of the old magazines and fanzines do, is put their stuff out.
Well, perhaps this has never been a business that put a high price on history, which is unfortunate, because it has a very, very rich history, as you well know. I'm preaching to the choir when I make that statement to you, but I remember having a conversation at a Cauliflower Alley Club event with Mike LaBelle, who was a promoter for Los Angeles. His family owned the Los Angeles territory, of course, before that went under. And I asked him why he didn't save all the video. Does he regret that? He says, "Hey, I was there to make money, not to make history."
Yeah, I've had that conversation with Terry Funk, with Tully Blanchard, with everybody, and said, why were the tapes not saved? And the reality is, and we've talked about this a lot on PWinsider Lead Audio, back then, nothing was saved. They didn't have the storage facilities, they didn't have the time, and the cost, everything was on videotape, which obviously would disintegrate over time, but the cost of those tapes at the point was like $100 a tape.
Right.
So, if the station would tape over the news every night, they didn't keep anything. There's footage of major sporting events that there's only bits and pieces of it.
Right.
Even early, and I could be wrong on this, but I think even early Super Bowls, there's not a lot of footage of I think the first Super Bowl, because the stuff wasn't kept. That wasn't the culture then. Now it's keep everything. And once VHSs got in vogue, now you have people with all sorts of private collections, and Lord knows what's out there. But the only everyone always says, why doesn't WWF buy the Memphis territory? And I spoke to someone that was pretty ingratiated in that promotion, and he said that even as late as the early 1990s, WMC TV wasn't keeping the tapes, and neither were the Jarretts, and neither were Lawler. We're talking early 1990s.
Right.
Because that was not the culture. And it's a shame, because, everybody out there would like to be like, hey, I want to see that tape of the final Tommy Rich Buzz Sawyer match from the Omni.
Right.
Or
it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Or I'd like to see some of these great Andre the Giant matches where he's doing flying body presses and drop kicks. It's not a lot of stuff out there.
It ain't there. Yeah. And it's a shame. It's a tragedy.
The one thing that I have been amazed at is, over time, a lot of Japan stuff has come out. So obviously, even though New Japan and All Japan started in the 70s, because they were owned by the TV networks, or their TV shows were owned by the TV networks, a lot of that stuff was taped and kept because the culture was completely different by then.
Right. And, a lot of times they would come to the U.S. and tape stuff. You'd see a lot of stuff with Inoki and Sakaguchi and all that from L.A., from the Olympic Auditorium. The Japanese would tape that, and they would keep it.
Yeah, I have a Crockett House show that was released either on tape or on television via New Japan, All Japan.
Right.
Because Baba and I think Jumbo Saruda, the late Jumbo Saruda, well, it's the late Brown Baba as well, they appeared on the show. And I think like one or two other All Japan guys appeared on the show. So it was a Crockett show, but in the middle of it was an All Japan match. So it's up airing over there, and that's the only way that stuff was ever kept. And trust me, there's not a wrestling fan out there that hasn't said, man, if I only had the tape of that show at the Charlotte Coliseum, or if I could only go back and relive that night at Mid-South. And to me, and I've always imparted this on every wrestling promotion, from the independents to TNA, they should be filming every show that they have. One for legal reasons, because it's going to be the only way you can defend yourself if something bad happens. 2, for your own archives. And 3, to eventually monetize those archives. Because let's say TNA wants to put out a Best of Bad Influence DVD. Well, instead of just putting out what's already been seen on pay-per-view and DVD, now they can go and pull like 4 or 5 different matches that were on house shows that were really good that nobody's ever seen before, and that might give a greater impetus to the average wrestling fan in wanting to buy the DVD. It doesn't.
Very true.
Even if you're just shooting like one stationary hard camera, to me, it's better to have it than not. And I'll be honest, one of the things that I've tried to do over the last couple of years, just for myself as a fan, is try and track down where some of these tape libraries went, because I'm so fascinated by those stories. Terry Funk, in an interview with me in PWinsider Elite, told me about selling the Amarillo territory to Dick Murdoch, and with the sale went the tapes. Well, when he got the territory back from Murdoch, he went to go look for the tapes, and the tapes had been thrown out. I know. When he told me that, my heart went down to my stomach and bounced back up about 4 times.
Yikes.
Because it was, that, like the famous story of Jim Cornette picking Mid-Atlantic tapes out of a garbage pile. Because I believe one of the, maybe Ole, threw them out because there was no use to them. And Cornette was like, oh my God! Right. Jim said, oh, dadgum! It's Flair and Steamboat! What are you doing? And that's why those tapes are in circulation in public domain. Because Cornette, allegedly, the legend has it, stole those from a garbage pile or a dumpster or something. I'll have to ask Jim about the next time I interview.
Yeah.
And boy, man, people talked about that Cornette interview for
they sure did. I thought that was great. It was good to hear his voice, for one.
Well, he'll be at the Mid-Atlantic Legends FanFest, too. He's going to be inducted into their Hall of Heroes with the Midnights and the Rock and Rolls.
I thought it's pretty cool that photo op that they're doing with all of them.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
The only downside is Stan Lane can't be there because he does announcing and producing for one of the boat racing associations, and that's like their biggest weekend of the year.
Oh no.
Yeah, so Stan won't be there, but the others will.
But that's a great interview on the PWinsider Elite section, and
2 hours of Jim Cornette ranting and raving.
Yeah, gotta love it. The Johnny Powers interview I have not listened to yet, but I'm going to do that later on today. Very much looking forward to that.
A lot of the older fans, a lot of our older readers, and by older I mean 30s plus, really got a lot of enjoyment out of the Powers interview because we talk a lot about who's wilder, because he worked with all these guys. Abdullah the Butcher or the original Sheik, who was crazier in the ring, because a lot of times those guys, because of the style they did not call stuff in advance or say, hey, we're going to do this tonight. They just, went out there and everything went to hell. And also, what it was like being in his early 20s, wrestling both Lou Thesz and Bruno Sammartino for their respective titles. And he compares the two in the ring as performers, but he also talks about working, or I should say, promoting opposition against the Crockett's and the McMahons for the year IWA, which Eddie Einhorn owned. He was one of the main players in that. And then, when Eddie Einhorn said, to hell with this, I'm getting out of the business, how he salvaged parts of it and started running opposition to just the Crockett's and the Carolinas, and some of the things the Crockett's did to try and stop him, which landed everybody in court. And so, it's a really incredible look at wrestling history from a guy you don't hear a lot from. And how many people can say over the course of their career, they ran head-to-head against the Crockett family. They tried to buy out Vince McMahon Sr. They tried to buy out Vince McMahon Jr. They wrestled Abdullah, Bruno, the Sheik, turned heel on Ernie Ladd, who was one of the greatest heels of all time, wrestled Lou Thesz, and all sorts of amazing other life experiences. I mean, the Johnny Powers interview, and I think it's like an hour and 45 minutes, to me was like sitting under the learning tree. And
without a doubt.
Flipping through a wrestling history encyclopedia, because, and that's one of the great joys of my job, is that getting these guys to sit down and talk about their lives, and it sounds sad to say this, it might be one of the only documentation of their career that anyone other than their close friends and their family might ever hear. Because you don't know.
True.
You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Exactly.
And not everybody's going to write a book, and not everybody's going to keep a memoir.
Right.
So, to me, like I was just talking to Tully Blanchard about this. Tully has been working on a book off and on for a long time, and I was like, "You've got to write it." You're Tully Blanchard. You have to write it. It's he was one of the greatest heels of the '80s. Both in Southwest and then in Crockett. And hell, even he was a top heel in the WWF and the tag scene.
Right.
So he's got a lot of really amazing stories, and even his story of his career, for the most part, ended when he got fired from the WWF for failing a cocaine test. That was 1989. So,
wow.
Fast forward to 2000. I mean, he wrestled indies, and he popped up in a couple places since then. He did a Slamboree and whatnot. But for the most part, as a full-time pro wrestler, that was the end of his career. Then you fast forward to 2012, we're going to put you in the WWE Hall of Fame. And that's one of the things I'm going to talk about with my interview with him, is, the emotion that comes around that, where, your career ended because of this in that company, and now they want to bring you back and celebrate your legacy, not just in that company, but your entire legacy of your career in the NWA and as a member of the Horsemen. How do you wrap your head around that? You know, that's the one thing I always try to, like, not talk to guys and make it, well, then you went to this territory and you feuded with Mr. X. What was it like with Mr. X? I like to talk to the guys about what their lives were like and you know, and like what was going through their minds at different times. You know, what was going on when there was a riot? You know, oh my God, 15,000 people are trying to kill you in Nigeria. What's going through your head?
Right.
You know, what goes through your mind when you're thinking I might die?
Yeah.
And to me, those stories are more fascinating, and that insight is more fascinating than, and I threw a drop kick instead of an arm drag because, which I hear a lot in wrestling interviews when people try to pick out the nuances with the wrestlers. You know, if I can give one piece of advice to people that interview wrestlers for a living, they probably don't remember every move they ever made. Because they're living life they were living life in a fishbowl, you know, and on fast forward, no less.
Exactly. All right, let's take a little break right here. When we come back, we'll talk about all the comings and goings in TNA and much more when PWInsider Radio continues after this.
Most modern-day fans think of JJ as J.J. Dillon, the leader of the Four Horsemen, and so forth. I've talked to JJ in the past for interviews, and we've talked a little bit about working in different places, but what was he like as a tag team partner as opposed to a manager?
He was very good. A good partner. We played off of each other well.
And he was a babyface at the time, correct?
He was. He absolutely was. A very lean, mean babyface. Yeah, he was. And I think is important, Mike, is, well, I mentioned JJ as my former partner inducted me in Charlotte in August, and Danny Miller is my former partner being inducted. And the relationship with both these guys has been ongoing. Danny, in his interview with Mike Mooneyham, and then with my induction, Mike had interviewed him, and then for his own induction, he said, we were like brothers. It was a great partner, and we were like brothers. JJ has complimented me as a longtime friend, as a mentor, believe it or not. And that's, I don't know if that's the kind of bonding, friendships, and stuff that goes on so much today as it did back then, because, we were on the road every day and spent more time together then as well. But, I think it's important in working together, but it's in our business as a tag team, it's important in the team for the team itself. It wasn't, if the booker came in and said, well, Les, you're dropping the fall tonight, or JJ, you're dropping the fall, okay. It wasn't, well, why isn't he dropping the fall? Or why am I not getting my hand raised? It was a business. And we had fun. That was, the one thing was consistent. I mean, there were always ups and downs, Mike, and, there was a day when you thought, Jesus, why am I in this stupid business? And, I mean, that's like, I don't care if it's the insurance business or the oil business or the wrestling business. That's the way it is. But overall, man, I had a blast. I had a good time. I was fortunate to be able to work with great people and good people, and it was fun. JJ was a cool partner, and I can't say enough nice things about him. He took a lot of heat because he was a hatchet man for Vince, and he was a hatchet man for whoever in WCW. But he was just a messenger. Jim is a caring person and a good human being. And I love him like a brother. Danny the same way. Danny had throat surgery last year. And, man, I was just so happy he came out of that, and he's going to be able to do the convention this year because he didn't get to make Mobile this year. But that's where I've been able to see him in the last couple of years. And, he was fun to work with. We traveled well, together. And his wife, Karen, is a friend. I always get a hug from her. So it's those are the kind of things that you can't buy, you can't make. They just happen. And that's what's, while we're on relationships, I was noticing that Big Nasty's going to be in Charlotte too, Angelo Mosca.
Yes, he is. They just announced him this week.
Yeah, I had a great time with Mosca there, and I'm looking forward to seeing him and Kenny Patera and Briscoe, of course, and all those guys are just Von Raschke, Jimmy, and we were all in that territory at the same time, and it's just that's going to be a lot of fun this year. It really is. And
are you as disappointed or sad as I am that not this year, but the 2014 version will be the final gathering in Charlotte?
Yeah, I am.
I got to tell you, my heart broke a little bit when I read that.
You know what? I'm thinking. My first thought was, God, I hope I'm invited to that one. But my second thought was, well, by God, I better be. I'm going to be a part of this Mid-Atlantic Memories documentary. I better be invited. If not, I'm going to hunt Greg down and shoot him or something. But
did you hear that, Mr. Price?
Yeah, Greg, I'm ribbing.
Jack Bounty Hunters.
Yeah, I was at. Well, he's got there's a picture up on Facebook today of Cottle and I from the first
FanFest.
Yeah. Can you hang on a minute? Hang on.
I'm going to pause. All right, everyone, we're back. Les had a phone call he had to take, and we are continuing. We were talking about earlier today on Facebook, the NWA Legends, Mid-Atlantic Legends Fan Fest, had a photo of yourself and Bob Call from the first fest in January
2004, right? Yeah.
That was the weekend PWInsider officially launched.
Yeah? Wow.
Mm-hmm. The site opened, and I went away.
and I've been on the site since that year, too.
You have been. You've been with us since day one.
Jesus, man. If you're listening to this, do I get stock in this friggin' company or anything? I mean, forget a damn breakfast meal in Las Vegas. That's once in 10 years. Come on, man. Anyway. Yeah, but that's, that was the first year and it has grown immensely since then. But Bob Cottle's going to be a part of the Mid-Atlantic Memories, too. And I think, I'm going to be in Charlotte the whole week before the fan, it starts on Thursday, but Alice and I are coming in on Sunday. And I've got some taping. I think Greg is going to we're going down to Park Center and shoot some stuff down there. That was where we wrestled every Monday night in Charlotte for years and years. And I don't know if we're going out to the old Independence Coliseum or not on Independence, but
Bojangles now, right?
Huh?
Isn't it the Bojangles Arena now?
Is it? I don't know. I don't have a clue. Yeah.
What used to be the Charlotte Coliseum.
Yeah. I don't know if I mentioned this to you or not, but a cool thing, and I said to Greg, I said if you could get that on tape for this would be cool too. Is I saw on Mid-Atlantic Gateway, my friend Dick site.
Dick Borne.
Yeah. Good guy.
Yeah, I like Dick a lot.
Yeah, the guys that run that thing are just tremendous people. Anyway, they've got a picture of a big collage that's on one of the walls at the Time Warner Cable Arena or Coliseum, whatever the hell it's called, in downtown Charlotte. Never been there, but it's a collage of, I think, of sports in Charlotte over the history. And son of a gun, if there ain't a cover copy of one of the Mid-Atlantic magazines that I did.
Oh, look at that. Yeah, well, that's like when I went to the Museum of the New South in Charlotte, which is all about the South following the Civil War and the Reconstruction era until today, when there was a wing for sports and they had material for Mid-Atlantic Wrestling in there. They had a program and I think maybe a Ric Flair robe. I mean, I was surprised that wrestling was represented, even though it's kind of embedded into the DNA of Charlotte.
Yeah, well, back then too, Mike, there were no. Now there's the Panthers, the NFL team, the NBA basketball team. There's no Major League Baseball, but there was no Major League sports in Charlotte. Wrestling was the Major League sport for years and years and years. So it's been a big part of the Charlotte. Mr. Crockett had a great working relationship. I forget the sports reporter's name. I've met him several times. He used to come out to the old Orioles when Crockett's owned the Baltimore Orioles AA franchise. He used to come out there, but he came to the matches, and he always wrote favorably about wrestling. And, and in terms of that, Mr. Crockett, or the Crockett family in general, were big contributors to the arts and to a lot of things in Charlotte. Mr. Crockett was a very private person. It's hard to say that the man, that ran a huge, business open to the public was a private person, but in sense of what he did for the city, or for the community in general. At one time,
in terms of his philanthropy?
Yeah, that's it. He just never spread, he never got up and said, well, I donated this or I donated that. He didn't want that done. To give you a smaller example, then I may have talked about this on our show before. When I had hepatitis in 1972, Mr. Crockett sent one of the guys by my apartment. I was out for like 6-7 weeks with money. And then he would call me. This would be like on Monday or Tuesday. And then he would call me in the middle of the week and, hey, how you doing, baby? And when I say baby, Mr. Crockett used that expression to everybody. But anyway, hey, how you doing, baby? Well, Mr. Crockett, I'm coming along. Hey, gosh, I hope to get back to work. Don't be in a rush. There's no rush. Everything's fine. Do you need anything? And every week I'd say the same thing. Well, so-and-so brought the cash by, and I so appreciate that. No, that's grocery money, baby. How's the rent, the car payment? Everything's taken care of. Fine. Okay. That year, that was 72. They always shut down for, Christmas holidays a week or sometimes two, depending on how Christmas fell. And so anyway, I went in to pick up my last payday and wish everybody Merry Christmas and head for Cincinnati. And Mr. Crockett just happened to be in his office by himself. And so when I went in to wish, I said, get ready to head home, Mr. Crockett. I want to wish you Merry Christmas. And I want to say how much I appreciate how you helped me out during my illness, and thank you so much. He said, hey, baby, do me a favor. Just don't tell anybody. It'll ruin my reputation. So I have a great respect for him. I really do. That was just I noticed that Mosca said, what a fun time. And it was, man. We just had a hell of a ball. And I think I've been, kind of dwelling on what am I going to say when JJ introduces me. And, kind of the normal things, but I'm thinking, with the guys in that room, Jerry Briscoe, Jim Cornette, Angelo Mosca, Kenny Patera, Danny Miller, my God, I could stand up there and tell funny stories. I'm no Mick Foley, but, there's a lot of, we just had a great time. We really did. We just had a wonderful time. I was thinking, when I found out Patera was going to be there, I bet a lot of the young people have seen on YouTube Patera up his back against a brick wall, feet on the front bumper of a white van, and the van, you hear the engine rushing, and
you see the wheels squealing, yeah.
Yeah, and him holding it back. Guess who was driving that van? Wow.
Was it you?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it was me.
So it wasn't a work?
Huh?
So it wasn't a work?
I don't think so. I was probably more frightened than Kenny was. Because, it was an automatic. And I had them back tires were burning, man. They were spinning. My whole fear during this, I don't even know how long we did it, Mike, maybe 2 minutes, maybe 3 at the maximum. It seemed like an eternity to me because I'm thinking, Jesus, Kenny, if you slip, can I jam these brakes on hard enough to keep from decapitating you, for Christ's sake?
Yeah, really.
Honestly, I was nervous. And I think one of the reasons they picked me because I'd driven race cars, and I guess they figured my reflexes in case something did happen. But I wasn't as confident in me as they were. So, yes, memories like that. We used to go out to Swede Hanson's and play flag football on Sundays. Swede was a baby face. Danny Miller and I, that was one of the things when Danny and I were partners. We'd go out there and sometimes, some of the, and it was just a great time. The camaraderie was, Swede had his nightclub, Club Ringside. And at that time, there was no liquor by the drink in North Carolina. And so there were bottle clubs. But like if you owned a club like Swede did, you could sell bottle beer, canned beer, or draft beer across it. So a lot of times we'd be there, and things would get busy. We'd jump behind the bar and help out. So they were nice. You might see Paul Jones and Les Thatcher drawing drafts and popping the lids off of beer bottles and helping out. It was just, I mean, nobody ever paid us. It was just, hell, it was fun. So, those are great times. They really were. And it's so much fun to go back to Charlotte for the FanFest and remember all that and be able to see these.
You're listening to PWInsider Radio.
Welcome back to PWInsider Radio. Sheldon Goldberg and Mike Johnson. Once again, folks, thank you for joining us this week on the podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support of PWInsiderTV, PWinsider.com. And for those of you who are not elite members, what are you waiting for? You want to join that today. You're missing out on a lot of great content like stuff you just heard, like stuff that we've just talked about in our previous segment, that Johnny Powers interview, 2 hours of Jim Cornette, much, much more. Folks, you don't want to delay. You're missing out on a ton. Don't do it. Join PWInsiderElite.com today. You won't regret it.
Yeah, everything from great interviews to great discussion to post-TV and pay-per-view, post-game broadcast discussions, and it's all ad-free. There's no advertising on the site whatsoever in terms of blinking ads or banners or any of that, and it's all on its own server to make sure that it stays extremely fast and works to the best of its ability.
It's a great experience, and I highly recommend it to you. A lot of comings and goings in TNA this week.
Yeah.
A lot of turmoil there.
As we record this, there's we don't know everyone that was released, but there were some budget cuts over the last couple of days. I've heard for a fact that a number of the gut check winners were released. Sam Shaw, Taylor Hendricks, Christian York. I've heard a couple of other names that we have not 100% confirmed, but I was told that there were going to be more releases over the next, as we record this, day or so. So, it's just another sign of, cutbacks and budgetary concerns within TNA, which has been an ongoing issue for a while. And, with you know this as anybody else. You're working, running New England Championship Wrestling. You've only got so much of a budget. You exceed that budget, you're in trouble. And TNA is a much larger scale that, yes, they have a huge backer, but they have to work within their budgetary concerns. It's not like there's an unending tap, no matter what anybody thinks. Right. There's not a stream of money just flowing in. So they've got to work within their budget. And, they've made a lot of changes over the last year, taking Impact on the road, taping it every other week on the road, cutting back on live pay-per-views, and so they're only doing 3 or 4 live pay-per-views a year. Obviously, there's some big-name talent that they have to pay, your Hulk Hogans and your Stings, and your Kurt Angles and whatnot. Right. And there's also been a lot of management changes. Pretty much their entire PR end is gone, and I don't believe there's anyone full-time working in PR. The head of marketing, Mike Weber, was just gone from the company. And they've also had some big-name hires, John Gabrick or Gabrick, who was big on Tough Enough and was a major cog in the WWE machine, is now going to TNA as a top executive. So, that money's got to come from somewhere. So I think it's a case of we're taking the cash here and moving it there in order to keep ourselves solvent. And unfortunately for guys, and in a lot of ways it's not fair, because I guarantee you these guys were not making a lot of money, and ladies, but you've got to be able to basically make sure that you're keeping your company strong. And unfortunately, a lot of times the low man on totem pole are often the ones most affected, and that's certainly the case with Shaw and Hendricks and people of that. That.
Right. It's true. When you have a wrestling promotion, you only have so many spots. You only have so many matches you can put out there. It's like people ask me all the time, well, how come you don't book me? And in some cases, it's not that they're not good. It's not that they're not somebody that has something to bring to the table. It's that there's no place for them at that particular point in time, given what's on the table right then and there. I've done some of the shows for New England Championship Wrestling of late with just 5 matches on the card. I mean, that means it's probably 2 less matches than you'd see on what would be considered a normal independent card. So there's at least 4 spots like there, more if it's a tag, that don't exist. So you just can't book everybody. And you have to feel bad, because you mentioned some names, and I'll just pick out 2 of them. Two of them that I have met and have had some experience with. One would be Christian York, who was a great hand, and is a kid who's been around for a long time. I remember him back in the Tony Rumble days. And that's a kid who should have gotten a shot somewhere, a real chance to do something somewhere along the line, because he's talented and a good kid, and someone that really deserved an opportunity in this business. And the other is Taylor Hendricks. Taylor Hendricks is a great girl. Taylor Hendricks worked for New England Championship Wrestling, our World Women's Wrestling division. She's someone who really in the last couple of years really improved a great deal, really focused and concentrated on getting better in the ring. I always used to tell Taylor, I thought that she was the most beautiful girl in wrestling, and that if her work ever got to the level that her beauty was at, that there would be no stopping her. And I still feel that way, and I hope that she lands on her feet, and I hope that she gets a big opportunity somewhere else, somewhere down the line, because that is a person who deserves it. And I hope that folks like this can find their way. Of course, we're always looking for talent in New England Championship Wrestling, but I think Taylor might be past that level at this point. She may need to be seeking out some bigger fish at this point. Not that she wouldn't be welcome if she was available.
Well, I mean, you have to think that if now that they've got some TV time behind them, whatever limited TV time there was, and also had the chance to work under, because a lot of these gut check people that were signed went to OVW in Louisville. Mm-hmm. They've had a chance to work under Danny Davis. It's probably helped them improve their in-ring. You would think the next step would be to reach out to WWE and try and get a contract to maybe go through developmental. And it's not unheard of that signed TNA talents end up in developmental. Consequences Creed, who was a TNA tag champion, he's been in WWE developmental for a while, as Xavier Woods. And, listen, you got to do what you got to do. And WWE developmental, especially now that Performance Center is opening up in about a week, they're going to be hosting upwards of 70 to 80, 100 developmental talents. So that's where you want to be if you want to work for WWE at this point.
Right. And they're looking to add more people into that program.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. They for the first time, they're really putting muscle and time and money behind the developmental system. Before it was kind of like, yeah, it's over here and it's going to help us out. Now it's like, it's part of Hunter, it's part of Triple H's regime and Triple H's job to run that sucker. So he's not going to allow it to fail.
Well, they can't afford to have it fail because that's the future.
I know that, and you know that, but beforehand, it was kind of like, oh yeah, OVW, oh yeah, we'll stick him in Florida. Now it's, he's running that sucker day to day, and nothing with his stamp on it is going to ever fail. You know that.
Well, let's put it this way. He doesn't want it to fail. Whether it succeeds, I think there's a big flaw in their system, a gigantic flaw in their system, and that is that, it's not possible for you to book everybody. It's not possible for you to give every person that gets into that program an equal chance to be successful. And I think what they need is not so much a developmental program. I'm not saying they don't need a developmental program. But what they really need, Mike, is a pre-developmental program. What they really need to be doing is reaching out to companies like New England Championship Wrestling, like... name them, any number of independent companies around the country.
There's so many little groups out there.
And say, look, okay, we see what you're doing over here, because they watch everything. They library our television shows. They know, I saw Howard Finkel at that New England Hall of Fame and FanFest, and, I hadn't seen Howard in quite a while. He knew exactly what was going on with this company. Oh, I'm so glad you're on TV. Yeah, somebody down there is watching it.
It's probably Howard. It's probably Howard, because that's one of his roles within WWE is to keep his eye on the landscape.
Right. So, not to reach out to companies like this, and I'm not saying that they should make all these companies developmental territories, because they can't do that either. But what they really need to do is take some manpower, whether it's a couple of agents or maybe some people who work for the company who are retired, and put them on the road part-time, going out to these companies and saying, oh, we want to see who's here. We want to give you some advice and help you out a little bit. Maybe we'll throw you a few dollars here or a few dollars there. Maybe we have some guys that we have under contract or that are in our system that we really can't. They're a little too far past developmental, but we can't use them on the main roster either. We still have to pay them. So let's take this guy over here and give him a couple of matches in your company, and maybe he can help your locker room. And give some of your guys. Hey, not all the guys on your roster are going to be WWE material, but for the ones that are, or for the ones that could be, at least what they'll get is some semblance of an idea of what they need to do to be WWE material. Yeah. Give them some sense of how to prepare themselves to get to that next level. That's what's missing from the developmental program, is some earlier stage where they go to what's out there, they try to encourage what's out there, but encourage it in a way that prepares talent to get to them. And some are going to make it, and most of them aren't. But for the ones that are, and for the ones that could, that little bit of effort right there could mean the difference in creating, a guy who could make that money back 100-fold. So that's what I think is the missing piece in the WWE developmental program. I've thought that for a very long time, and I'm dismayed that the company doesn't make more of an effort to do that sort of reaching out.
Yeah. The idea that you talk about, it's not unusual to what they were doing a decade ago, where, when they signed a bunch of WCW guys, they all sent them to Les Thatcher's HWA, which at the time had a developmental deal with them. Mm-hmm. But, they're, even if they opened up a small territory, like, Jim Kettner still works with them doing marketing and promotion in Delaware. Mm-hmm. Why not send a bunch of guys to Delaware and work under Jim Kettner? Lord knows he's a good trainer.
Yeah.
It sounds weird to say this. Why not send some guys to Ring of Honor and have them work in Ring of Honor dark matches?
Mm-hmm.
They used to send guys to ECW. They sent everyone from Al Snow to Darren Drozdov to Brackus to Furnace and LaFon to ECW.
Right.
Part of it was to let guys get experience. Part of it was because they didn't have a role for the guys and they thought maybe Paul Heyman would help develop some characters. And part of it was we've got to do something with them. They're sitting around doing nothing and they're going to get stagnant.
And who better to develop characters than Paul Heyman?
Yeah, but there's other people out there. Even if it's like a Gabe Sapolsky or whoever, obviously they're not going to want guys to go and work, and go kill themselves doing 10,000 spots. But the idea of them sending guys to independents like yours to work undercard matches and just to work and learn and be able to learn how to work in front of a crowd, to me seems like a good theory. Whether it's your company or someone else's. And to be able to work in front of a
camera and cut a promo and carry a program and, put asses in seats. I mean, people seem to forget that that's what this business is really all about, is putting asses in seats.
That it is. Well, Jim Ross had a line in Beyond the Mat, and he said, I could care less if they cheer or boo. As long as there's an ass every 18 inches, I'm happy.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that is the secret of pro wrestling right there.
Right, and whether it's watching on television or whether it's, watching online or whether it's coming to a live event, you got to get their attention. You got to get eyeballs on your product. And it's a lost art. People don't understand that that's what it's about. They think a lot of the guys who are on the independent scene right now are so poorly trained in that aspect of the business. Sure, they can bump. Sure, they can put a match together a little bit. Maybe they're not 100% experienced. Maybe they're rough around the edges. Maybe they have something somewhere that they can bring to the table. But the people who are training them have never been in the business itself. They've never had to make a payroll. They've never had to, know what it's like, the pressure on them to put asses in seats and to cover your costs and to survive as a business. They're just showing up, doing their match, going home, and they'll worry about tomorrow night's match for some other guy down the road then. I mean, if you're going to be successful at anything, you have to have passion for it. You have to have passion for what you're doing, and you have to have an understanding of what you're doing and what you're doing means. And that's a very big piece that's missing in training today, because the trainers themselves don't have that experience. So I sort of look at NECW in some ways as an extension of wrestling school, because when we get people in our companies, sometimes we have to teach them different things or set things up in a simple way that they get to do it without realizing that they're doing it. So it's a challenge, but it's an interesting one.
And the thing is, no one should ever want to stay on the independents. I mean, if someone's in the business just because they love it and it's something they want to do on the weekend to make extra money while they've got a full-time job and a family, that's fine. But if you're a young guy who gets in the business to become a pro wrestler and you're looking to do this for a living, where you don't have to do anything but pro wrestling for your life, you shouldn't want to stay in any CW. You shouldn't want to stay in any independent company. You shouldn't want to stay in your local groups.
Yeah,
you should be wanting to use those as your learning, as your university and your graduate school, where you've learned in your wrestling school, and now you go to these places to learn to get better and figure out the right and wrong way to do things. Not just in the ring, but also your etiquette and how you carry yourself, how you deal with people, how you cut your promos. Because a lot of, I've seen guys who are great workers walk in, and I've heard guys who are great workers walk into the back of the WWE taping where they are booked as extras to do whatever, walk in, don't shake anybody's hand, sit down, go grab food, walk around with food in the locker room over people's bags. Before they've even gotten in the ring to work out, they're never getting invited back because they have disrespected the locker room. So there's a proper way to learn everything.
Right,
and the way to do that is to go to a place like NECW or an independent of, legitimate repute.
I want to disagree with one statement that you made. And that is that we're trying to be successful. We're trying to make money here. That's what this is all about. If we fail to do that, then we're not doing something right. And, it's a very hard business to make money in, but it doesn't mean that, here's the thing. If you go back in time and you look at ECW, and ECW is the best example of this. ECW was comprised of guys that nobody wanted. Comprised of guys that largely couldn't get booked in major companies.
And that had tryouts and were passed on.
Right. Had guys that had a little bit of experience, but couldn't catch on in main events and so forth, a la Shane Douglas or, whoever. And when that company started to draw and started to work and started to make money, when those guys rallied behind it, and that machine started to click and it started to work on some level, that's when the big companies got interested. The old saying is nothing succeeds like success. Yeah. If you do something that works, if you are someone that is putting asses in seats, if you are someone that has caught fire and that people are paying money to see, don't think those big companies aren't paying attention, because they absolutely are. They are desperate for people that can do that very thing. Maybe you have to learn their system. Maybe you have to adapt what you've learned elsewhere and fit it into that corporate machine. But if they see that you are somebody that people want to pay money to see, you become a valuable person, and you become a valuable person right away. And we could go down the list, Mike, and look at all those guys in ECW who went on to work for WCW and went on to work for WWE, who would never in a million years have been in the wrestling business if it weren't for ECW.
Oh, yeah.
And it proves that point. I mean, I tell this to people all the time. I mean, our company's in it. I don't mean to just wave the flag for NECW, but I own it, so I have to wave the flag.
Who else is going to wave the flag?
Exactly,
not for you?
Exactly. We are in a position right now where we have all the pieces on the table. We just have to put the pieces of the puzzle in the right place and wave the flag. This past week, our last episode of New England Championship Wrestling on WMFP TV, which consisted of a very big angle, an angle that is going to push business for the next year between Antonio Thomas, Slick Wagner Brown, and Jeremy Prophet, Sean Burke, former champion, returning. Big angle that Bobby Ocean just joining the company. Big angle we just did. This week on YouTube, over 30,000 views.
Nice.
Okay? So somebody's out there watching it. You can't say, well, nobody watches that. So what? Who cares? No. People watch. People care. If there's something out there that's good, people are going to watch it. They are going to watch it. They are going to come out. You just have to get behind it. So, one of my frustrations as a promoter is you've got umpteen other people trying to do the same thing. But one of these is not like the other. This is the one that's on TV. This is the one that 30,000 people went out of their way to click and watch this past week. And if it doesn't look like you care enough to wave the flag and say, hey, watch this, why should they?
Yeah.
So, it's just, I guess, to sum it all up, independent wrestling is whatever you make of that experience. You need to make the best of that experience. Do your best. Wave the flag for it. If you're appearing on a show and you're not promoting the fact that you're appearing on that show, shame on you. Be somebody that people want to pay money to see. It's a simple statement, but it's a lot more complicated than just that statement. We all have to work at it. It's a partnership. Everybody works together. But, money can be made in independent wrestling. It can be done. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and please God, it's not an oncoming train. But, we're in a position right now where we can do some pretty good things, and I'm looking forward to that challenge. So I've put my NECW flag down for the moment, and we can get back to your regularly scheduled programming.
Yeah. Well, let's flip the coin from independent wrestling, which in a lot of ways are some of the smaller shows on the spectrum,
right,
to the biggest show of the year, WrestleMania 30, this April 2014 in New Orleans. We're only in July, and already word is coming out about the ancillary events that are popping up as sideshows to the main WrestleMania course. WrestleCon, which last year did tremendous business with a fan convention, probably the biggest fan convention of all time, with everyone from Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior on down appearing, as well as live events presented by a number of promotions, all under one roof. This year, and you can find information about this on WrestleCon.com, they announced that they're going to be running 3 different sessions in New Orleans. The first session being a Saturday morning session, which will include a live podcast recording with Colt Cabana, the famous Colt Cabana. Some of you who are familiar with podcasting, you might have heard of the guy. He's a little famous. And in the afternoon, they're going to be doing another afternoon's evening session with a comedy show starring Marty DeRosa, as well as a live indie event, which is designed to be an all-star indie event where different promotions each send a match or send talent. And a couple of different groups involved there already are Combat Zone Wrestling and Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. And then after that, later on that evening, after the WWE Hall of Fame, which is always the night before WrestleMania, there'll be the $5 Wrestling live event, which is, for those who have never seen $5 Wrestling, I advise go on YouTube, Google $5 Wrestling and Freight Train. It's kind of self-explanatory. It's sort of a tongue-in-cheek Mystery Science Theater sort of pro wrestling style, where the guys are not the best in the ring. Or let's say if CM Punk's the best in the world, these guys might be the polar opposite. And there's a fun tongue-in-cheek sort of color commentary done by the aforementioned DeRosa and Cabana. It sort of celebrates the silliness of pro wrestling and also sort of takes the love of B-movies and puts it in the pro wrestling sort of setting. So it's a fun time, and they do angles, and they have their characters and stuff. And their champion is this guy, Freight Train, who just you just got to watch his promos. It's hard to explain, but once you see it, you'll know what I'm talking about. He's kind of like Forrest Gump in a lot of ways. He's very smart, but the way that he speaks and the way that he presents himself is very similar to, say, Forrest Gump. Tom Hanks' Forrest Gump. So they've already announced that. Of course, Ring of Honor is going to be running a couple of shows in Louisiana as well on Friday night and Saturday afternoon. And now new to the experience this year is, no pun intended, the WWN Live experience, which is the group of events that host their internet pay-per-views on WWNlive.com. The group run by Sal Hamoy and Gabe Sapolsky. They're going to be doing Dragon Gate USA, Evolve, and Kaiju Big Battle, and possibly additional events. And they're going to be running events all day Friday, all day Saturday, and probably Sunday afternoon before WrestleMania. So they're going to be probably, I'd gather, 10 to 12 wrestling events in Louisiana over the course of that 4 or 5 day period, not including the WWE.
Talk about sensory overload.
Sensory overload, wrestling Woodstock, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
If you're planning to go to Louisiana, my advice to you is start saving your money now and make sure those credit cards are clear. Yeah. Because by the end of that weekend, you may not have your cash. And you certainly may not have your credit limit. Because if you want to do it all, you're gonna have to be ready to pay. But I mean, it's always a great thing. What's interesting is, especially this past year, we're now seeing in the past, wrestling promotions built to the big event. Now WrestleMania is like the big whale, and all these wrestling promotions are like the little barnacles, sort of hanging off the side of that whale. And surviving off of it because
Klingons.
Yeah, they can make more money over the course of that weekend than they probably could in 6 months of business because there's all these fans internationally that have now converged in one place who are willing to spend their time and money, especially the international fans, because those fans are coming over. This is like their once-a-year treat to be able to indulge in pro wrestling. So it's going to be it's always fun. And I got to tell you, I have been to every WrestleMania covering it in one fashion or another since WrestleMania 17 on. That's the first year that I started going. I've been to previous ones, but ones that were local to me. Right. And by the time I come home, I need to sleep for about a month.
Yeah.
Because you never stop. You just, you get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and then you go to bed at like 2 o'clock in the morning, and then you wake up and you go, oh my God, I have to do this for 3 more days. It's a rough schedule if you really try to do everything. So New Orleans is going to be a hell of a time come this April.
I'll bet.
But one thing that's going to be a lot of fun is next week WWE has their Money in the Bank pay-per-view.
Yes.
Obviously from Philadelphia, we all know that audience is always very loud and boisterous, unlike the audience we had in Sioux City this past week, but we'll forgive them. They might have been tired. A lot of interesting things coming out of that show. Rob Van Dam making his first appearance for WWE in a number of years. They've done a great job building this up without him even appearing on TV. Just the music videos using the old WWE and ECW footage, and One of a Kind and all the crazy stuff off the ladders and the dives on Jerry Lynn and all that. It really looks like, they built it up like this is like this mythical figure returning out of the shadows to WWE. And, he's in a hell of a match, in a ladder match with Kane and Christian and CM Punk and Daniel Bryan and Randy Orton and all these other guys. Now, my first thought was, why waste his return match in that where you could have him separately as an attraction, especially in Philadelphia, where obviously he cut his teeth as a national star. But when you think about it also, who better to put in those crazy extreme situations than Mr. Monday Night?
Very true.
So I'm really looking forward to that show. And I also think they've done an excellent job in the build. And this is not something I say a lot about John Cena, but the build between John Cena and Mark Henry, where for once John Cena is showing a little bit of fear for the monster, and Mark Henry is not falling prey to John Cena's bad one-liners.
Right.
So I'm excited about that. More of a traditional babyface versus monster heel build than we usually see with Cena, even with his previous program with Ryback. And I think that's led to a lot of really increased interest in that match, especially because I think fans really believe what Mark Henry says when he says, I earned my chance. I deserve to be WWE champion, because they've seen him over the years be put into all these situations where basically a lesser man would have quit. And instead Mark Henry was like, I don't care, I'll do it. And eventually, morphed into the world's strongest man, monster beast that we see now.
Yep.
So I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking very forward to that show. I'm also very curious to see what they do with Dolph Ziggler going forward, because since they've turned him sort of babyface, he's been running away from three-man band, which is weird because three-man band, it's like running away from George South and the Galaxians. Like, what the hell is going on here? So I'm curious to see what their long-term plan with that is and what trigger they're going to pull with him. But I think there's a lot of interest in Money in the Bank, and the last pay-per-view was excellent. The Payback show was a great show. Extreme Rules was okay. WrestleMania had its moments. But I think Money in the Bank, to me, has the most potential for a great show that WWE has had for their monthly shows since the TLC pay-per-view that closed out 2012, which was an excellent show. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, look forward to that.
Yeah,
absolutely. All right. That's about it for this edition of PWInsider Radio. From Mike Johnson, Sheldon Goldberg. Once again, folks, thank you for listening. Make sure you check out PWInsiderElite.com. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody.